Awesome. So I love that we're switching things up this week. For those listeners who don't know me, my name is Ashley Ryell. I'm a good friend of Amal's, and I am the founder and principal of a thought leadership consulting firm, UntapSocial, based north of Boston. It's so cool to be here and switching things up for today's conversation. And I want you to understand how this sort of idea came to be, right? So, Amal, you and I were walking on Plum Island earlier this year, and I was confiding in you about feeling really desperate about my financial situation, right? And feeling really doubtful that I was going to meet my income goals for the year. And I remember you immediately stopped walking, you put your hands on my shoulders, and you said, Ash, you've got to look at this differently. And you gave me so much advice that day. And I realized the breadth and depth of knowledge and wisdom that you bring to this conversation and you bring to so many folks who have been in my situation before. And I have so much more to learn from you, clearly, right? And that's kind of what
Oh,
I brought away from the conversation.
that's so sweet. No, but the funny thing is, I don't think that you were saying that you were desperate in any way. Like you were just trying to, which we all do. You were minimizing it, but I could tell you were anxious. So I think it's important to let people know that you're an entrepreneur who has been successful and you are having a time period where you weren't getting steady stream of new business coming in and you were starting to feel anxious about money. And it was just on the heels of me having a similar, because anytime you're an entrepreneur and are provide a service, a lot of times you have ebbs and flows. And in the flows, you feel amazing. And then in the ebbs, you're like, shit, I suck. Why can't I do better? What the hell's wrong with me? Maybe I shouldn't be doing this. And then you start to like doubt yourself. And I just got the sense that you were doubting yourself and you could see this anxiety in your eyes, but you were minimizing it. So I don't think you were coming like into the conversation being like, I'm desperate. You were more like, oh, it's okay. But you were like kind of all over the place.
It was so true. And I love that you could see what I couldn't see in that conversation. And that's definitely one of the many strengths that I know you bring to your clients and your client relationships. And I just love that you hit the nail on the head with that. And you really could see what was happening underneath the surface. And clearly you can empathize and sympathize with that rabbit hole that we go down as folks who are high achievers or have been in an entrepreneurial seat for a long time. And uh, those ebbs and flows are real. Those peaks and valleys are so real. So I love that we get a chance to reverse roles here and you be in the hot seat and for me to ask you the questions, right? So I'm so excited that that's what we get to do today. And I know so many of your listeners want to be more financially successful. They want to have a better relationship with money. I mean, who doesn't? And so many of us, I mean, I know a lot of your listeners probably have met their needs and at one time, if not right now, have lived comfortably, but yet still worry about money. And so I'm so glad that we get to open up a dialogue today and talk about what is still taboo for some groups, right? And how, what's really keeping us from realizing our financial freedom. So yeah, I'm ready to dive in. Let's do it.
Yeah, let's do it.
So tell me, growing up, what was your story around money? What did that look like for you?
Okay. I just finished this 21 money manifestation for my listeners, and some of you haven't heard it. I don't remember which day it was, but I talked about my relationship with money and where it came from. I came from a family. I was the youngest of five. My parents were immigrants, and my dad worked as a baker for years. He made donuts, and he worked at night, and he worked really hard. And for many years, he worked at least two jobs, sometimes even three jobs. And my mom stayed home to take care of us. And I never really realized it until I remember I was like maybe 11 or 12. And now I'm dating myself, but Jordache jeans were in style then, and they were like $90. So that would be like probably like what, like $400 now? That would be really expensive. And I wanted a pair because everybody else had them and I wanted them. And I remember just like whining about it. And my brother, who was older than me, finally saying to me, Amel, do you realize that we're poor? We're poor. And I was like, huh? Like it hit me. But now, then looking back, we were poor because we early on, we must have gotten some type of assistance, not later, but I remember early on having meal what are they, like tickets for lunch. So I didn't even know. I thought everybody used those. But they were, it was free lunch, these meal tickets. And I remember government cheese and powdered milk, disgusting. But so we were poor. But then as we got older, my parents were really skilled at stretching a dollar, right? But so there was a lot of, what's the word I'm looking for? There was a lot of mixed messages around money because we didn't have a lot of money. But my dad drove a Cadillac. It makes no sense. So and it was because my brother sold cars as they got older, and that was his one thing that he wanted because he all he really did was work. He didn't do anything else, and he slept. And somehow, I don't know, they got him like it was used Cadillacs, but that was important to him. And then my mom bought like she had like this thing with shoes and purses. So I remember there was this one closet, you'd open it up and there'd be all these shoes and purses and they were like messy. And I just remember that would give me anxiety, the mess. But she would never use them or she'd buy them and take them back or so there was this weird mixed messaging around money. And as I grew up, I never felt I was a spender because I never had it. So when I got it, I wanted to spend it. Like it felt good. And another weird thing, I don't know if I'm kind of all over the place with this answer, but I think these are all kind of things that molded my story around money or kind of created what I felt. And another thing that comes to mind is that my parents always, they had friends who had money. A lot of our friends were wealthy, which is so weird when you think about it. Like, why? Maybe there was something. I get the sense that, especially with my mom, she valued that, that was like important to her. And then as I got older, I tended to gravitate toward people that had money. But so I was always the one who didn't have enough money, right? And so I had this anxiety around money. It was like never enough. So that's, I guess, I don't know. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, so I'm hearing like there was this narrative that you kind of grew up with, or eventually at one point sort of established as your own that you would never have enough, right? And there's fear around that, right? Like you're saying your parents like when you had money, you'd spend it. So this fear around not having enough, let's dive into that. What does that sort of look and feel like? And how does that show up? Where does that show up for people and for you?
So the fear of not having enough comes from, in my experience, the fear of not having enough. So money is something that we all need, right? And so if we don't have enough money, there's this fear that what if I can't pay my bills? What if and if what I do with my clients is I have them take that further. Then what? I say, then what? If you can't pay your bills, then what? Oh, then the creditors will start calling. Then what? Then maybe I'll lose my apartment or my house, or maybe I'll lose my car, or maybe So if I make a mistake, this is what I see a lot with my clients. If I make a mistake at work, which we're human, and sometimes we don't even make a mistake, but we're just so hard on ourselves. So if I don't do this perfectly, this is like this nebulous feeling of I'll get in trouble. But no one actually says that because that sounds like, I don't care. I don't feel like I'm going to get in trouble, but it's somewhere deep inside. And then if you get in trouble, what could happen? And then so where we go is I could lose my job. And then what? And then I'll lose my house. And then I'll lose this. And then my kids will end up, living in a bus or whatever. You know what I mean? So everything will go wrong in my life. So we create these subconscious like narratives in our head, and it comes from this nebulous fear, this anxiety. And the fear really is around those three needs, the fundamental needs we all have, and they're to feel, especially the two needs of safety and security, and of to feel worthy or good enough. There's also a need to feel loved, but Most of the time around money, I see the feeling, the security, obviously. And then there's something mixed in with the worthiness with that security. Does that make sense?
It does, it does. And I have a similar story to you, and I want to ask you about these three emotional needs in just a minute. So I empathize, right? I've got a mom. My parents live an hour away from me in New Hampshire. My mom has two freezers downstairs in my parents' basement, right? And it's filled to the brim with food, with meat. She packs it in, you know, and she forgets what she buys, right? And then some of it goes to bad. The expiration dates have expired, right? So it's actually a funny story, Mal. This happened literally 2 days ago. I was home visiting my parents, and my dad said, he goes down in the basement and he says, Ash, you know, come down here. I want to get rid of some of this stuff that your mom's not even going to realize is missing. Right. And so he goes into the freezer and pulls out several bags of peas and a few bags of frozen strawberries, right? And he says, just take this home. She'll never know. And sometimes I have to go home and throw them away myself without her knowing, because
Really?
again, the expiration date has gone by, food has gone bad, it's sours. But it was very clear to me that she inherited that need for security and that scarcity mindset of not having enough from her parents who grew up in the Great Depression, right?
Yeah,
And so it makes sense. And I want to talk about this in a minute. It's clear that she probably inherited some of that from her parents,
yeah,
right? And
absolutely.
it's probably right. And I'm going to guess that I've inherited that from her. And so when you talk about the three emotional needs, I my question for you is like the chicken and the egg, right? Like which comes first? Do we feel our do we feel worthy and the sense of security comes from that? Or do we need to feel a sense of security first, and then what begets that is this sense of worthiness? Is there one that comes before the other?
Everybody's different. And that's the thing. So we all have, so if you look at, let's just look at the needs for a minute, right? Obviously, every human needs to feel loved, right? And if babies, there's studies that show that babies that weren't loved, hugged, cared for have a higher mortality rate and they don't progress as well, cognitively in life. So we all obviously need love. That makes sense. There's lots of studies to show that. Um, Safety and security, that's a no-brainer. And that's money is so closely linked to security, right? It makes us feel like we're going to be okay because like we're talking about, there's this fear, this underlying fear, this like it's not going to be okay. But when I make this amount of money, everything will be okay. So that's not necessarily true either, though. I mean, I think a certain amount of money, yes, if you know that you can pay your bills, if you know that if your kids want to go to college or if you have kids and you can take care of all that and you don't have to worry about money because you're not living paycheck to paycheck, above a certain level, money is not going to give you more security. You think it will, but then you get there and you don't feel more secure and you don't know why, right? So that's
Right.
security. And then there's the worthiness, which if you have been a kid that has a sibling, or if you have kids that, if you have more than one child, you see this in action. Children from the best families will compete with each other for the attention and approval of their parents. It's just how we're wired as human beings. And you start to see how we show up as adults, even if we're confident, there's things that we do to feel good enough. Or a lot of times there's this underlying small little voice that feels like we're not good enough. Maybe it's not always there, but it comes around. It's self-doubt, right? So I can't answer, unfortunately, what comes first, the chicken or the egg, because everybody's a bit different. Some people need a higher level of security than others. And some people, their feeling of not feeling good enough is so much stronger, right? So I think for everybody, it kind of shows up in a different way. And I have a perfect example of a client that I had that was just this really amazing woman, right? And she made great money. She had been a high level executive for many, many years, and she's a saver. She came from a tough upbringing, and there was a lot of uncertainty in her home. Her parents were both alcoholics, and there's a lot that she went through as a child. And one time we were talking about an issue that came up at work, and there was a mistake made. And she didn't make the mistake, but she had signed off on it. And she was very upset to the point where it seemed like she was overreacting over this, right? And we had this discussion, and I said, you know what? I think this is coming from something deeper. Your need to show up in a certain way. And I asked her the questions like, what if it's found out that you made a mistake? Number one, you're human. And she didn't make the mistake. She just happened to sign off on something, right? What's the worst thing that can happen? Then they're going to think I'm not good enough at my job. And then what? Then I'll get fired. And then what? Then I won't have enough money to live. And I said to her at that moment, I bet you have money saved. And she said, I have more money than most of the people I know. She goes, I'll be fine. But no matter how much money she made, she never feels secure. But for her, that came from a fear because she didn't have that security in her life, right? She didn't feel safe. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does. And for her, that came from specific experiences that she had as a child, right? So I want to kind of go back to that for a second, right? Like, do you believe that we inherit these relationships or these narratives around money from our parents?
I think in a lot of ways, our parents, some people are lucky enough that their parents actually teach them about fiscal responsibility and money, right? But most people are not taught about money. We're not taught about that in school. And our parents generally, not everyone, but our parents generally don't teach us about what we need to know. So yes, because even if they're not telling us things, we're learning by what we see. So if you grew up poor, right? So I'm going to see, let's check these off. For me, that's a tick. Yes. If your parents argued about money, yes. If you were taught that people who had money are greedy or money is the root of all evil, for me, yes. Your parents were unable to spend. Oh, there's other people like this. This wasn't me, but your parents were unable to spend no matter how much money they had. And they, like your mother, right? They may have been children or grandchildren of parents in the Great Depression. So they always had the feeling that the money would run out. That's like my client and your mom, right? Or some people had everything they needed, but no one talked about money. So, you don't know what that person's relationship with money is going to be because it was almost like taboo to talk about. And it reminds me of these money scripts that Brad and Ted Klontz wrote about in Mind Over Money. And I just find them interesting because I feel like people do tend to fall into one or more of these scripts. You want me to read them to you?
Please, I'd love to hear it.
So money worship. And don't get caught up on what what the name is, because we have to be honest with ourselves too, right? So money worship, money. So this is what the type of people that fall into that category. Money buys happiness. They obsess over money, never have enough. Oh, wow. That's definitely me. Money status. Money defines their self-worth. May overspend to look like they have more money. Money avoidance. Avoid money for fear, anxiety about money. Wealthy people are greedy. I think I have a little bit of that too. Money vigilance, more frugal, savings, work hard to earn. I don't have that. What are you? Money worship, money status, money avoidance, or money vigilance?
I would say maybe a combination of the first two, something like that. I'll have to go back and look. But that feels right for me. My parents didn't have money. We couldn't afford the college that I wanted to go to. And so I had to get scholarships and talk about being real on the podcast, right? You're such a proponent of this. We talk about what we're afraid to talk about on the Grammas Leadership Podcast. My parents' house that I grew up in was foreclosed on. And so I grew up with a similar narrative that I'd never have enough. And not necessarily that it was taboo to talk about, but it didn't matter how much I saved or how many jobs I worked, it would just never be enough. So I those are very real and true for me too.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that's definitely a trauma, right? If your parents' home was foreclosed on too, because it feels like, see, bad things will happen. Because that's the biggest fear, right? Like people have, like I won't be able, I'll lose my home. That's scary.
Yeah, it's a real thing, right? And that's worst case scenario. But and so you can see now, Amal, and I'm sure a lot of your listeners again have either been in my shoes or are now, when I talked to you back in July, these last 6 months, I've learned a lot from you. I've learned a lot about my relationship with money and where it comes from today and in the past. And I've got some tools in my toolkit, but I took some time off this year to write my book, and it's a down market for me as an entrepreneur right now, as a freelance consultant. And so I've really stepped with 2 feet back into the scarcity mindset of not having enough, feeling like I'm not going to have enough to pay my bills for the rest of the year. And so for folks, wherever they are in their relationship with money journey, for someone like me who's slipping back into some of those old habits or never really learned them in the first place, how can we pivot when we start to slip back into that scarcity mindset?
Okay, that's such a great question. So this really comes down to the energy. So it's all about energy. Everything we do and everything we create and attract to ourselves is about energy. And everything that we retract away from ourselves is about our energy, right? So when we are in that fear mindset around money, when we feel like, so when we're doing that, we're saying things in our head which are not true. They're limiting beliefs and they come from that fear. And they say things like, I'm not going to be able to do this. Maybe I should just, change what I'm doing because I'm not going to be successful at this. Maybe I'm not good enough at it. It's where that whole imposter syndrome sometimes comes in. And even if you don't have full blown imposter syndrome, you could start to just doubt yourself, right? And when you start to doubt yourself, you start to say things like, this won't happen. I can't afford it. I can't make it happen. It's a down market right now. People aren't buying what I sell. So those are all, I know it hard to swallow the fact that that's a limiting belief because there's people that still can succeed in a down market. And the study that I did early in my career as a coach to identify what the best leaders do, they succeeded when others failed, even in down economies for year after year after year. And what they did was they became really vulnerable and they were really willing to kind of put themselves out there and they were willing to grow, continually grow and improve. And they were willing to learn from anyone at any level. So the reason I bring that up is because even these amazing leaders who other people weren't doing well, but they were. Why? It's because they understood the whole concept of when I speak like this to myself, when I believe this about myself, that is the energy I'm putting out there. And it's making me feel desperate. Because when you're
I
saying to
see.
yourself, it's a down market, I'm not going to grow my business this year. I can't afford it. What am I going to do? Those are all things. What am I going to do? Those are things I've said, right? Many times. That is, what are you doing? You're focusing on what you're not going to have. That's scarcity, that's lack, that's fear. And when you're in that frame of mind, you're feeling a bit of a desperation, right? So when you're feeling those feelings and you're saying those things in your head, what do you think people feel from you? Because we're all energy. 93% of our communication is nonverbal. What do you think the energy you're putting out is?
Well, it's certainly negative. It's limiting. It's not it's not an opening of possibilities. It's not a curiosity or a positivity. It's contractual in a stifling way, right? It's restricting. I'm just thinking about the energy behind some of these
Yeah.
statements, right?
Yeah. It's desperate too.
Mhm,
Do you
mhm. I
want
feel that. I
in the
feel
time
that energy.
so you feel that desperate energy.
Mhm. Yes.
The secret to shifting out of that scarcity mindset is to witness and see when you are in that limiting belief, observe it as false. It's false.
Oh, yeah. Catching yourself in the act, right?
Yeah, so it's catching yourself in the act. And sometimes you catch yourself in the act by how you feel physically. So our emotions are our internal GPS. So when we're starting to feel down, when we're starting to feel sad, when we're starting to feel anxious, stressed, whatever those feelings are for you, you're going to feel it in your body. And when you start to feel it in your body, that's your reminder. Okay, what am I thinking right now? Oh, this
Mhm.
thought, is it really true? Get curious. You have to get curious in that moment. And then that leads us to action, because when you get curious and you look at what have I been saying to myself? Oh, I've been saying that it's a down market, and I've been saying that there's nobody out there that wants to buy my my service. And then maybe I start to say, I don't think I'm good at this. Like the other people are doing well. Why aren't I doing well? And I've said that many times
Yeah.
to myself, right? So when I'm saying
Yeah.
these things, where am I putting my energy? Not
Yeah.
in
It's a great question.
doing anything about it. So then
Right.
I just had this conversation with Lauren Daly, who you know well, and she's such a beautiful human being. She's a financial advisor, works for a major company, right? And they were at the national meeting last year, and she didn't feel energized, jazzed up about what she was doing. And she said, "You know what I'm going to do this year? I'm going to do a 100-mile race." Which, come on, anybody in their right mind besides David Goggins who does that, right? And I'm gonna get 100 new clients. And she's already past
Wow.
she's past 50, which is not easy, right? So she might not get to 100, but she's doing what it takes to get to 100. So the reason I bring that up is because I asked her, how are you doing it? And she said, I ask for intros with everybody I meet, and I ask everyone I know, who do you know that this would matter to? So the bottom line is, well, first we have to identify what we're saying to ourselves, how it's making us feel, how it's false, right? And then we have to shift our focus and get into action. So right now, you and I have, like I told you, because I had been doing that too, you are focusing on what's happening to me, what's not possible, how much I suck, all those things. How can you focus on getting new business? What do you need to do to get new business?
Yeah. Yeah. And I think you hit the nail on the head. It starts with catching yourself in the act and reminding yourself like this isn't true. And then I think it's the mindset shift. And I think, we're all one new thought away from that. I'm where I sit right now, if I hear you correctly, is I'm one new thought away from looking at my financial situation completely differently, right? With an open mind and with some curiosity, right? And so I've done something similar lately to what Lauren has done, and just asking folks to have a conversation and see how I can support them or fill in some gaps. I'm opening up my mind to different collaborations with folks that I wouldn't have necessarily partnered with in the past. I'm taking more conversations. I'm driving down to Boston a little bit more frequently these days,
Okay.
right? So there's progress in that, but I think you hit the nail on the head, right? Like I know you do some affirmation work with your clients and manifestation work. I know that you subscribe to the energies of business, which I know you talked about with Amber Liliestrom in your last podcast, right? That was a great conversation for listeners who haven't listened yet. And I took so much away from that. And I like the idea of looking at like some key phrases that I need to shift, right? It's a down market is constricting and limiting. There's an alternative phrase to it's a down market, right? There's an alternative phrase to I'm not good enough. There's too much competition now. I might as well throw out the baby with the bathwater, right? And so I
So
think
let's look at
from
that.
what I hear you.
I'm sorry.
Yeah,
What's the alternative
let's
phrase?
do it.
Yeah, what's the alternative phrase to it's a down market?
There's new ways for me to be creative with how I sell my services.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe something like that. Do you have a better one?
No, it's not. They're all good. I mean, it's not about that. It's
Yeah.
what's going to, in the moment, when you say it's a down market for you, if that gets you out of it and that helps you to shift, great. For me, it would probably be other people have done it in down markets.
That's a better one. I'm going to steal that.
Only because I
That's a
think
good
what you're
one.
saying is good. And it's, if it work, like I said, if it works for you, but I know myself, I would be like, still say, but yeah, but it's still a down market. Like, it's almost like I'm trying to fool myself. Like, I need the proof. So that
I
so proof is it can be done. Other people have done it. Other people are doing it.
okay.
Here's one.
Okay.
This is too hard. I'm just gonna get a full-time job.
Oh man, that's a good one. I guess I could flip the script and say, yeah, Ash, you could get a full-time job, but is that really going to make you happy? Right? So I view autonomy and freedom in my work and flexibility in my work almost above all else. And that's what makes me happy. So if I got a full-time job now, great. Maybe it would give me a feeling of financial stability, but maybe in 6 months, I'm out the door. My
Maybe
priorities have
5
changed, or maybe they never
years.
really changed in the beginning.
Maybe in
Right,
5 years
exactly.
and say, where am I gonna be if I got a full-time job? How am I gonna feel?
And to be honest, Amal, I might have not even have lasted 5 years in a full-time job,
Right.
right? And and so I think, the grass isn't always greener on the other side when we think about throwing in the towel, when we think about what will give us that financial security. Um, I question that, right? I want to be open and have an open mindset. Like, sure, that might work, but when you get down to it, money doesn't buy happiness for me when it comes to my work. My autonomy and my freedom does.
Okay.
So maybe
Yeah.
that's how I would flip the script, right? Is it's not going to actually make me happy, and I'll remember why I do this work in the first place.
There, see, that's perfect. And that's why sometimes flipping the script, you have to talk it out and then you come around to it. And that's what happened with you. So that's great. Yay. Okay. So I got one more for you. And then I think we should probably end for today. I think this has been an awesome conversation. So let's leave everyone with this. So this is what I challenge you to flip this script. Maybe I'm not as good at this as I thought I was.
Oh, another good one, Amal, right? That comes back to the imposter syndrome and maybe even a little bit of perfectionism too, right?
It's comparing ourselves to others because we don't feel like we're good enough in a way. Definitely imposter.
It,
Or we
it
doubt.
is comparing ourselves, right? And I don't know the answer to this one, but maybe it's something around I don't need to compare myself to others. I have unique gifts to bring to the world that only I can give.
Yeah, yeah. That comes down to, I think when you're comparing yourself and seeing someone else as a finished product and thinking that that's where you should be, not knowing what it took for them to get there. And that's not even who they really are, right? So maybe I'm not as good at this as I thought I was. And maybe it's something like I'm human and my journey is teaching me what I need to get where I need to go, or something like that. I'm not sure exactly what it is, but I'm just wondering if that might fit.
Yeah, that's beautiful. And maybe it's something too along the lines of I acknowledge that I only see other people's final product, and I acknowledge the hard work it took for them to get there.
Yeah,
And the same might be true for me, right? I acknowledge the hard work that we do to get us where we need to go. And
I love
there,
that.
right? It comes back to the social media sort of narrative around like we only see the filtered version, we only see the positive, we only see the final product.
So I think we leave with that because the next step is action, and that'll be for another day. You have to flip the script, and then you need to get into action, and that's what we'll talk about next time.
Oh, I'm so excited. Awesome, Amal. Well, thank you. Thanks for being in the hot seat today. I love that we flipped the script. I love that we flipped our seats. I
Yeah.
can't wait to have the next conversation with you about our relationship with money. I don't think it's even still talked about enough, especially in our spaces, regardless if you're an executive at a company, if you're a solopreneur, if you have a team of freelancers, wherever you are in your financial journey, there's clearly so much more that our listeners can learn from you. So I'm excited for the next conversation. Thanks for having
Thank
me
you
as your
so much.
guest host.
Thank you for being my guest host. Bye, guys.
Awesome. We'll see you soon. Bye.